Hey guys, Zach here, and today I'm going to be redoing this terrarium that you see in front of you. Now, this terrarium is very good, and I've enjoyed it a lot. However, I think it is time for something new, so I'm going to take this terrarium apart. What I want to mention is the reason why I'm taking this terrarium apart is because in order to keep it nice and watered and keep all the plants healthy in this terrarium, I ended up having to cover the front with saran wrap, and I just couldn't enjoy the terrarium at all, so I feel it's best to start from scratch. So let's get into it. Now, in order to start, I took out all of the hardscape and plant and substrate from this tank, which was easy enough. The next thing I did was remove all the remnants of the silicone and spray foam that was left on the glass in this tank, which I just used a razor scraper to slowly work away at. It took a little bit of time, but I eventually got to all the nooks and crannies and got most of it out of this tank. With the bigger chunks of spray foam, I found it was actually more effective to just rip it out with my hands instead of trying to pry it out with pliers or use the scraper. After I had the tank mostly clean, it was time to move on to the next step. The next step was easy enough to do. I was just going to remove the brace from the front of the tank, this outside trim. I wouldn't need it for what I was thinking about for the future of this tank, and I just used some utility knives to cut away the silicone and pop that brace off. Once it was off, I was able to use a razor scraper just to clean the silicone from the glass. I don't need it 100% perfect, but I did want it good enough. I also used the razor to split one of the panes of glass from the rest on this tank so that I could have it free on its own and I could move it to a different spot to kind of rework the tank. In order to create a new tank out of the already existing tank, I had to reattach that glass panel in a different location to give it a different shape. In order to do that, I had to silicone in this front panel to a different piece of the tank, which would then create a water reservoir at the bottom so I could create a nice Palaudarium. Now, this was easy enough as I didn't have to do any glass work or change the glass at all. Keep in mind, I did use isopropyl alcohol to clean the glass before putting the silicone on. 24 hours later, and the silicone has cured, I did a water test before bringing the tank inside, which it passed excellently, and I can get moving right into the scape. For this, I'm thinking I want to try and build a nice little tree in the corner that is actually going to have some piping running through it and is going to have some water coming out of this branch right here dripping down into the tank. Before I start actually building the scape, I want to add in a little compartment for the pump before I get ahead of myself. To do that, I'll just use this little egg crate light diffuser and hide it behind the cork bark like so. In order to start the scape, the first thing I did after getting the pump in was just run a line of silicone around the bottom of the tank by the pump here. Then I just stuck the cork bark right into that. What this is going to do is create a little housing for the pump so that none of the other debris in the tank, like the substrate, does actually get into this compartment so the pump can run smoothly. But just in case, I did leave that little bit of room so that once the silicone is dry, I can hide the filter foam behind it like this. After getting the base down in the tank, it was a fairly simple process continuing on. I just took chunks of cork bark, used silicone and anchored them in, and waited for the silicone to dry and then moved on to the next piece of cork bark. Well, this does sound tedious, and yes it was definitely worth it. There was about 15 minutes between each time I siliconed where I had to let it kind of cure before I could move on to the next. So all in all, it took a couple of hours. However, I was very happy with the result. While waiting for the silicone to fully cure on the hardscape, there were a couple of other small things that I could do in the meantime. The first being adding in the substrate. I first started with a media bag full of topsoil, and then I capped that off with a mix of sand and gravel. Once I had all the substrate in, I decided to add in a couple of these larger river rocks just to give it a little bit more natural of a look, and I gotta say I'm really happy with how this substrate looks. With the silicone still drying, I had originally intended to use a spray bar in the log. However, I soon found out that it just didn't work, so I scrapped that idea and I just let the silicone cure again for another 24 hours. After the silicone was fully cured, I was confident enough to fill up the tank and give the pump its first test run just to see how the water flowed. Now, I wasn't super thrilled with this, but I was very happy to see that it was doing what I wanted it to do. With the pump up and running, I was now able to start to adjust some things to try and get the flow going the way I wanted. The first thing I did was adjust the pipe inside the log to try and get a different kind of flow. The next thing I did was use this small piece of corkbark to try and adjust the flow a little bit, see if what I could change, and I was quite happy with this. However, as you guys can see, it did start to sort of freak out a little bit, but the bigger problem was that it was just splashing a lot and water was coming out the front of the tank. At first, I thought I would just need to lower the water level in the tank. However, I then thought to just use a piece of bark like this to catch the water and stop it from bouncing out the front, and I just had to make a couple of small adjustments. Using this wood and moss, I actually was able to change the sound of the water as well, which did greatly quiet it. Here is the before, and here is the after. As you can see, the after is much quieter, which I was really happy with. With the pump solved, I could move on to planting the rest of the tank, and I'm going to continue on with moss that I've got out right now. Corkbark does wick water quite well, and it absorbs it, holds onto it, so I can actually add moss up the tree a little bit and not have to worry about it drying out, as moisture will make its way up to that moss. I also added in some Spanish moss hanging down from the top of the tree, as well as some Hydrocotyl tripartita that I was growing immersed just for an occasion like this. I kind of wrapped it around and tried to have it hang on the tree, but I did also add it into the water as well, and at the base of the tree where it comes out of the water, in some of that moss where I think it will really thrive. I also decided to add in some crypts into the base of the water just because it was starting to feel a little bit empty. Now at this point in time, you can see that the water has actually gone quite murky just from me stirring up the substrate, as well as some of the tannins that have leached into the water from the cork bark. It's so murky, in fact, you can barely even see me put this jungle val into the tank. So let me do a quick water change. And just like that, it is nice and crystal clear, and I am super happy with how this tank is looking. Now, I know that the water feature isn't completely packed in, however, I didn't want it to be. I wanted to have a sort of forest/jungle feel to it, and I know that as these plants grow in, it'll definitely gain that feeling. I am also very happy with up top, and especially how it incorporates in with the lower piece of the tank, and I can't wait to see how the hydrocotyl will grow in this upper area. So that is everything for this video. As you guys know, there is nothing in the bottom of this tank yet, so if you do have recommendations, please leave them down below in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have enjoyed, please consider subscribing, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.